step, removing the steering wheel. This particular car has a aftermarket steering wheel, as you can see. All steering wheels have to come off. Different ones come off different ways. Remove the steering wheel nut after your wheel's out of the way. Steering wheel puller installed. You'll want to remove the hub as such. Your hub's out of the way. Now, column mast, undo at the dash, take bolts loose and floor. You'll have two 1/2-inch nuts under the dash holding the bracket to the dashboard. Take those 2 nuts completely off. At this point, remove your retention plate at the floorboard. It will have 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 sheet metal screws. It's a 2-piece plate. It will come off in 2 pieces, which surrounds the column. I'll remove that now. Okay, column mast is out. Okay, all we're doing now, after we've got the steering shaft housing removed from the inside, we are now taking the nut off the pitman arm on the steering box, and we will remove the steering box from the car to get it out of the way. What about a pickle fork? I got a hammer. Nice, it's loose, Roger. It's loose. Yeah. Okay, now we'll drop the drag link loose from the pitman arm. It's free. Now the box is completely free except for the 3 chassis bolts. At this point, we will remove these 3 chassis bolts, take the steering box and steering shaft out as one unit. The box bolts are now out. The box is now free. Out comes the box, steering shaft, and all from the bottom. Alright guys, this morning we're going to modify the column that come out of the Falcon. This particular column was a column shift column. Whether your column is a column shift column or just a straight plain column, floor shift column, the modification will be the same. In this instance, we removed the mast from the car with it in the car, then we drop the steering box out of the bottom. Your next procedure will be to cut the shaft. If you have a fixed shaft, up to 67 it will be a fixed shaft. Cut the shaft loose from the box with a sawzall. However you want to cut it. If you have a rag joint, a 67 up, that has a rag joint coupler, just unbolt it from the box and just saw the rag joint off. Same procedure. It's been cut loose from the box. At that point, I put the shaft back in its original position. This is where it comes right back out of the column at that column at. At which point, I take a measurement. Doesn't matter where you measure to, you can measure from in here or on the outside, just as long as you use the same measurement both times. 1 inch and 3/4. At that point, remove the shaft. Lay the shaft next to the column in the same length that it came out. Just like you were putting it in the column, except it's going beside 1 inch and 3/4.
Okay, at this time we're ready to cut and splice our double D onto our solid shaft. And the procedure I use is I lay the shaft down beside the column with the correct distance up at the top end. I know that I want this a minimum of 1 inch back up in the column, my splice joint. It has to clear so that my bearing, as it fits in, it has to clear this part of the bearing, so we don't want it jammed up. Then I take my DD piece and lay it down beside of it. You want half the DD into your splice sleeve, which is 4 inches long, and half of your 3/4 round. So I make my mark on it. At that time, saw this off, slide it half into my splice sleeve, have my welder to weld around it. Then I take the opposing piece which put together will look like this. Weld around here also. With your shaft, you will get two 3/16 roll pins. We then drill a hole through each piece, drive the roll pin through, and then grind the excess ends off of it so that it becomes flush. Slide it back up in the column. And now it's in position. Now at this time is when you install your bearing retainer in the bottom for stabilization. Bearings installed and ready to be spot welded in. Spot weld it. Get 3/4 of an inch around, roughly half, 3/4 inch. Just serve a good spot weld. All you're trying to do is just tack weld it to the outer jacket so that it won't have a tendency to walk out. It'll stay in place. Once it's spot welded in, I take my black locking collar, slide it up over there. It slides up over the shoulders, a cam lock. Take your Allen wrench, stick into your screw head like a little lever, hold your shaft, pull it tight like that, and at that point, tighten the set screw down on the shaft. That in turn keeps your shaft from walking up and down through the bearing. Put your steering wheel back on at the top where it wants to be. If you misjudge it, you may need to adjust the top up or down. By adjusting the up or down, you would loosen this Allen screw back up, slide it up or down to get your steering wheel gap right at the top, and lock her back down at that point. Then you're ready to install it in the car. And once you get it in the car, that's when we'll check our joint angle. This joint goes, like I said, goes on the bottom. You've cut it back off wherever you need to. This is a little long here. You would slide it up on it.
Okay, guys, we're getting ready to install the steering column back into the car. Most of the time, most guys are using the OE columns. It will install the same way installing this column. This particular column is a chrome identic column. In this particular car, this is what the customer opted for. Same procedure as reinstalling your column. In this instance, the customer opted for an aluminum column bracket. Not necessary. It will come with the hardware to install the column with your stock bracket. Use either one. This is added cost. Locate your turn signal indicator, of course, to your left side. Beside the bottom of the column, through the firewall. Bring it up to the dash bracket, to the actual height you want it. And actually, guys, at this point, this column can go from contact with the dash pretty much all the way back up. So it would be up to you to decide the length you want to put it. We try to put them back in stock location. Hang on to it, Roger. Now that's a fit, fellas. Now on this installation, if you're using a billet aluminum bracket, I would recommend and suggest that when you bolt it to the bracket, the bottom part of the bracket to the dash, leave the two insulation bolts slightly loose. You just want it to make contact. Do not tighten these bolts yet. Install the column, put the cap on, tighten the cap to the actual base, and then come back, tighten these to your dash. So if there's any type of distortion, it can't take place at this point in the center of the bracket. If it tries to distort, it would be out here on the ear. Fellas, that's all there is to it. At this point, the column's in, ready for our wiring adapter to be spliced back into our existing wires. Install a wheel adapter, and the customer's going to put a billet wheel on it. And that will be it. At this point in time, we're going to put our steering joints on the rack, the steering joint on the column, and measure the distance in between so we can cut our double D shaft to the proper length. There is a procedure to follow on this, and you have to stick with this procedure. This is a tricky operation. The shaft has to be in the correct place. It has to be in place for good. It cannot move. If it moves, there's a chance that you could get into a joint bind during a turn or something, which would be disastrous. You have to follow these directions. Okay, the first thing I do is I take both joints, my column joint and my rack joint, and I take all of the lock nuts and the jam nuts off. I slide my rack joint on the rack, and if you'll notice, there's a slot in the rack. That is where your set screw will sit. Your set screw will sit in that slot. Okay, when you put these joints in, these joints will go 7/8 of an inch on the shaft, no more. What you have to be careful of, guys, if you'll notice inside the joint, the actual joint itself,
Tip it forward. There you go.
here would come in contact with the shaft at this point if your shaft is too far down, which would limit your travel and cause a bind in your joint. If you have your steering shaft installed in your car, if you turn your steering wheel and you feel a bump, 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 or a click, 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 it's a very likely source that that shaft is coming in contact as that makes rotation. Okay, keeping in mind, I'll put my joint down in one position or up in the position in this full travel and bump it against that shaft. And then I'll slightly pull it away. That way it will not interfere. You're talking a 1/16 of an inch or so at the most. Just pull it away where it makes no longer contact. Take one set screw, screw it into place on the column to hold the joint on the column in its correct position. Okay, the joint is now locked down on the column temporarily. Now I will go and put one set screw in the actual rack. And you can turn it in any position. Set screw into slot. Joints locked down. Okay, at this point, you will want to take, and if you turn anything to line the shafts up, you want to turn the column. Don't turn the rack, remember, because it's centered. You will throw it off center if you turn the rack. At this point, I line these joints up straight with each other, the ends of the joint. Measure between the two. Get an exact measurement, exact, which is, in this instance, 4 1/2 inch. Between the joints, exact measurement. 4 1/2 inch. At this point, we know that 7/8 of an inch of this shaft is going to go inside this joint on each end. So you would add 4 1/2, 7/8 for this end, and 7/8 for this end, which would be a total of 4 1/2 plus 1 3/4, which equals 5 1/4, 6 1/4. Excuse me. Got to carry the one, guys. Double measure. 6 1/4 inches.
Okay.
Four 1/2. 7/8. 7/8. 6 1/4. 6 1/4 is our measurement, guys. At this point, we will cut our shaft. Okay, at this point in time, we've removed the shaft from the car. I've got it clamped in my vise. This is the marks that we made with our Sharpie marker through the actual set screw opening in the joint. Now, I will lightly put me a center punch so my drill won't walk. This is actually a very close eyeball measurement. We're going to use an oversized bit. The main objective is just to keep the shaft from walking, so we'll be using a bit that's actually larger than the set screw. Okay guys, now to the drill press. I'm going to start out with a 3/16 bit, and I'll drill down about 1/8 of an inch. Remember, this is just for the set screw to set in, so the actual depth is not critical. You just don't want to go too deep and end up weakening your shaft. This is just a locking device. At this point, I'm going to step up to an actual bit that is just a little larger than the set screw. We're just enlarging the hole, so our set screw will lock in place. Shaft will not move. And that's all there is to this one step, but a very important, critical step. Has to be done, guys. Do not put your steering shaft together without this. Okay, before installing the shaft, I always take a file and lightly deburr, because this shaft is an interference fit in the joint, and this takes off any of your drilling flash. Okay, now we're back inside the car engine bay. We have already installed the joints, marked the shaft, took the shaft to the drill press, drilled the indentations for our set screw. Now we're going to install it for the final install. Pull your rack out slightly, set shaft inside of joint, slide shaft up into the other joint as we did before, put your back in place at this time. We're ready to install all 4 set screws. Use Loctite. Absolutely must use Loctite. Okay, at this point, all 4 set screws are locked in place. Now I will tighten these down. I back off the nuts. These are the same as if you have any knowledge with valve trains, this is just like a poly lock on a valve or something. If you don't, what we do, we take the Allen wrench, tighten the set screw down, then you run the nut down, and this is just actually a jam nut. Then you'll tighten the 1/2 inch nut down. And what I like to do on the final tightening, take the 1/2 inch wrench, put on your set screw lock nut, turn it. When it gets snug, put your Allen wrench back in and turn both of them together slightly. You'll feel it lock into place. It's good and tight. At this point, this shaft is locked in place between our 2 joints. With that done, I'll go back up to my column joint. At this point, I will take either my column or my rack joint. I'll do those separate from these. I'll do one at a time. Leave this one tight. There again, you're locked tight. Screw it into place. Same procedure as the shaft nuts. Allen wrench, turn both together. A slight turn, about 1/8 of a turn is all it takes. Come back down to the rack bolt. Same procedure. Okay. Joints locked in place, locked, tighted, torqued, everything's good. Now at this point, before you go any further, take your joint in your hand and turn it from lock to lock. Turn it all the way one way, all the way the other way. You should feel no resistance. It should be a smooth turn. If you feel a bump, a click, if it snags, if it hangs, stop at that point. As you can see, smooth rotation. You should feel nothing in this joint. It should just turn. That's it, guys. Steering joint in place, column in place, rack in place.